It's wonderful to see the students from Champion School here and to see us as we debate important bits of legislation and take part in the democratic process. So nice to see you here. And I always find it edifying and educational when you hear from the government House Leader with his many years of experience in this House. And I think you have something to teach us, but just too many is not a third many. No. But let's talk back on Bill 10. Let's talk about exactly what this amendment does. And I rise to speak in favour of this amendment because I think it's important. One of the most important things government can do is impose some constraints on public spending, some parameters. I think of it as sort of two telephone poles on the prairie. We're not telling us exactly where to get, just somewhere in there. And unfortunately, what Section 5 of Bill 10 does is it removes any possible constraint for government spending. Now, in the private sector, in the market, we have these natural forces of the market which will tell you what you can spend, what your expenditures can be, what your costs are, how much you can charge your customers. And that isn't the case in government. We don't have necessarily the same constraints in the same way. So it's the job of government to put some parameters in, to put some guidelines in. And that's exactly what that 15% debt to GDP cap did. You know, I think that it's important for us to understand, when we talk about Alberta's debt to GDP ratio, the importance that credit rating agencies place on the debt to GDP ratio. It is not the only measure that they use to determine what Alberta's credit rating will be, but it's a very important measure. More important, though, than the specific number itself is it sends a signal to the market that Alberta is a responsible fiscal operator, that it has a plan to constrain debt, and that therefore any money that is lent to Alberta is in safe hands, and that those who are lending that money will have a reasonable expectation of getting paid back. Now let's have a bit of a lesson here in how credit rating agencies work. They look at risk. What is the risk of default on a particular loan? Now, as a result of Alberta's relatively strong balance sheet and relatively low risk, to date we have very low interest rates. That's a good thing. You know, to the member for Spruce Grove St. Albert, talked about a school that was facility that was old and constrained, and there was never enough classroom space. That is exactly the problem that we need to solve in this province. Absolutely. It's a very real problem, not just in Spruce Grove St. Albert, but all around this province. We do need to build more schools. We do need to update the schools that we have. And in doing that, we stimulate the economy and we create jobs. Keynesian economics. It makes all the sense in the world when we're borrowing for capital, because there's an asset behind it. And to do so in an economic downturn makes sense. We don't want to do it all the time. But borrowing for operations, which is what exceeding the 15% debt to GDP cap does, allows this government to do, puts really no constraint on spending, and that's a big problem. So that's why I think it's so important that we vote in favour of this amendment. And there's one final point I want to make. This government, in their original plan in the election, said they were going to balance the budget by 2017. Clearly, there was a bit of a math error, and that turned into 2018. So that's two plans. And then they got into government and they said, well, actually, it's going to have to be 2019. So that's three plans. And the fourth plan, what's the fourth plan? The fourth plan is no plan at all. There's absolutely no plan or interest in balancing the budget. And so that's why it's important to have some caps. And so you can work with the public service and you can work with Albertans and say, look, here's the level of service we're able to provide. Here's how much we're able to spend on it, because there's a limit. What removing this cap does is it makes that borrowing unlimited. It makes the easy choice the only choice. So they've tried everything except actually constraining spending in any sort of meaningful way, which is why I'm enthusiastically supportive of this amendment, and I would sincerely hope all members of the House would vote in favour. Thank you.